Okay, so last time we met, Naomi and Ruth had just arrived back in the land of Israel, the country of Israel, in fact, in the little town of Bethlehem. And you may remember that Naomi was very sad because her husband and her two sons had both died in the land of Moab. I'm very sad. I've lost my husband and both my sons. Now, Ruth, who was from Moab, had been the wife of one of Naomi's sons that had died. So she was very sad too. I'm sad too because my husband has died. But you see, Ruth had travelled back to Bethlehem in Israel with Naomi, her mother-in-law. And this is what she had said to Naomi. Wherever you go, I will go with you. Wherever you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God is my God. So Naomi and Ruth set up home together in Bethlehem. But they didn't have much money for food. Well, it was harvest time, so Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields. I'll follow along behind the harvesters and see whether I can pick up any leftover grain, and then I can bring it home for us." "Go ahead," said Naomi. "That's a really good idea." So Ruth went off to the fields. Ruth went over to one of the fields and she took her shawl with her. And the harvesters who were working in the fields were gathering the sheaves of barley and collecting them up, ready to go into the barns for threshing. So, it's a good job done. There are the harvesters. So Ruth followed behind, and with her shawl, she gathered up the leftover bits of grain. She collected them all up into her shawl. This was called gleaning. And in those days, poor people were allowed to do that. Even if it wasn't their field, they were allowed to gather up the leftover bits of grain that the harvesters had left behind and collect them up. So she worked hard all day in the field gathering grain to take home in her shawl for Naomi. Now, as it happened, the field where Ruth was working belonged to a wealthy landowner called Boaz. And as it happened, just at that time, Boaz arrived in his field. He greeted his harvesters. "The Lord be with you," he said. "The Lord bless you," said the harvesters to Boaz. Then Boaz noticed Ruth, and he didn't recognise her. "Who's that woman?" he asked, "over there?" "Well, she's that Moabite woman, you know, the one that came back from Moab with Naomi. She's been working ever so hard." "Oh," said Boaz. Then he went and spoke to Ruth. "You stay in my fields with my people," he said, "and I will make sure that they keep you safe and look after you well. Now, the sun is shining. It's very, very hot today, so do help yourself to drinks whenever you want to." "Thank you," said Ruth. "You're ever so kind." "Well," said Boaz, "I happen to know that you are kind as well. You see, Naomi is a relative of mine, and I've heard that you were taking care of her and have come here to live with my people, who you didn't know before. May God bless you, Ruth, for what you have done." At lunchtime, Boaz gave Ruth and all the other harvesters some roasted grain to eat. Well, some for everybody. In fact, there was so much roasted grain that there was even enough for Boaz to give Ruth a basket to take home for Naomi. Then Boaz spoke to the workers, the harvesters, and he said, let Ruth take whatever she wants, even from the sheaves of barley if she wants it. So Ruth picked up barley, and when she went home, she carried it home to Naomi and the roasted grain. And when she got home, Naomi was delighted to see what Ruth had brought home. Oh, that's amazing, she said. Whose field were you working in today? Well, said Ruth, it was Boaz, and he has been very kind to me. Ah, Boaz, he's a very good man. He's kind to everyone, and he's a relative of mine. In fact, he's a kinsman redeemer. Well, that's a funny word, isn't it? So, a kinsman redeemer means that he had the right to buy the land that belonged to Naomi's husband and the land that belonged to her 2 sons before they died. And it also meant that he had the right to marry Ruth. So she would have a new husband and a new family if she wanted. Well, said Naomi, keep working in Boaz's fields and he will certainly look after you. So Ruth continued to work in the fields belonging to Boaz every day, and she lived with Naomi. One day, Naomi said to Ruth, we must find you a good husband who will take care of you. And then Naomi came up with a cunning plan. Tonight, Boaz and his men will be working in the barn, threshing the barley. When they have finished, they will eat and drink and then lie down to sleep. You must wash and put on some clean clothes and some perfume. Then go down to the barn. Then she told Ruth what to do. And Ruth did as Naomi had said. That evening, Ruth went down to the barn and she waited for Boaz to finish the threshing of the barley with the other men. When he'd finished the threshing, they all had something to eat and drink. Ruth was still watching. And when they'd had something to eat and drink, they laid down to sleep, still in the barn. And Boaz had a cloak over him, like that. Then Ruth went into the barn and she laid down to sleep just at the feet of Boaz, and she put the corner of his shawl over her. During the night there was a noise and Boaz woke up. He saw Ruth lying near his feet. "Who are you?" he said. "I'm your servant Ruth," said Ruth. "You are a close relative of my mother-in-law Naomi. In fact, you're our kinsman redeemer." "Well, you shouldn't really be here," said Boaz. "But I would like to be your kinsman redeemer and marry you. But there's a closer relative, a closer kinsman redeemer whom we must ask first." So, the next morning, Ruth got up before anyone else was awake to go back to Naomi. But before she went, Boaz asked her to hold out her shawl. And into her shawl, he poured a big measure of grain for her to take home to Naomi. When she got home, Naomi was very pleased with the grain, and she asked Ruth what had happened. Ruth told her everything that had happened, and then she said, "I told him that he is the kinsman redeemer for our family, and he told me that we have a closer kinsman redeemer." "Ah," said Naomi, "a closer kinsman redeemer. Well, don't worry. He will certainly sort this matter out today." And she was right. That very day, Boaz went down to the town gate, which was where all the important decisions were made, and he waited for the closer kinsman redeemer to appear. And as expected, the closer kinsman redeemer did appear. "Come and sit down," said Boaz. So he came over. And Boaz told the man all about Ruth. "You are the closest kinsman redeemer," he said, "so you can buy all the land that belongs to Naomi's husband, Elimelech, and her sons, Mahlon and Chilion. But with the land comes Ruth. You must marry Ruth." "Ah," said the man, "no, I cannot marry Ruth. And you're the next in line, Boaz. You're the next in line, kinsman redeemer. So you can buy the land and you can marry Ruth." So Boaz bought the fields that belonged to Naomi's husband Elimelech and her sons. And Boaz and Ruth got married. And then Ruth had a baby. And she named her baby Obed. And Ruth and Boaz looked after Naomi. And then Ruth put the baby into Naomi's arms. And Naomi looked after him. Now, the reason that this story is so important is that Obed, the baby, when he grew up, was the grandfather of David, who started off as a shepherd boy, but eventually became the king of the whole of Israel. But that is another story for another day. The important thing to remember from today's story is this. You see, Ruth was from Moab, but when her husband died, she took care of her husband's mother, Naomi. She went back to Israel with her and stayed with her and worshipped God because of her. She was loyal to her husband's family, and she turned from the ways of following Moab to the ways of following God. And because of that, God rewarded her with a new husband who was a wealthy landowner and a baby and a home and an important part to play in the story of God's people, the Israelites. So let's be loyal people like Ruth. Let's look after our families like Ruth. And let's be loyal to God like Ruth. And now we're going to do our craft to help us remember the story and to teach it to other people.